What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Memoirs Podcast. I am your host, as always, Mike Murray, and we have an awesome conversation for you today with two of my favorite individuals in the evidence-based fitness industry. Dr. Guillermo Escalante is back for round 2. As a dedicated listener, you might remember that he was on episode 31 to discuss his research on fasted cardio and refeeds. We also have John Jewett back for the three-peat, a clear fan favorite here at the Muscle Memoirs. This is definitely an episode for the bodybuilding fanatics. We covered John and Dr. G's recent competitive season, and this ultimately pans out into a tremendous chat on the science and practice of bodybuilding contest prep. Before we dive in, I want to remind you, dear listener, to check out the content over at hammerawayfitness.com, where you can also sign up for nutrition counseling and personal training if you're interested. Finally, if you enjoy the episode, please be sure to share it with a friend and leave a review on your preferred streaming platform. Thank you so much. Now let's get into it. John, run us through. You just competed at the Olympia. Tell us about your placing, how you felt about the result, and your mindset moving forward into the off season.
Yeah, so I'm now 3 weeks post-show. Just did my second Olympia, so this was the 2020 Olympia. Lots of crazy situations to get to it. So now in Orlando in December, the week before Christmas, doing the 212 division. So last year, 2019, was my first Olympia debut, which was a real up-and-coming year for me. Won a pro show, got to Olympia, ended up getting fourth place, which I was just blew me away. I was coming from a fifth place 212 guy to all of a sudden getting fourth place at the Olympia. So it was a pretty surreal experience. So going into this past Olympia 2020, I had a mindset trained to win the thing. I think we all do going to Olympia, or at least you don't want to be realistic too, but I got to train to win it. That's how I have it in my mind. So ended up getting 13th. Going in, I kind of had this idea of where I was at and that I was off going into the show. So there was probably more disappointment, and frustration early on in the weeks to the show. But once I was going to Olympia, I'm just extremely grateful to be competing at such a high level anyway. Walking out on stage, I love to compete. I love to be out there. So I'm just going to make the most and give it 100% my all and kill the variables that I can that are in my control while I'm in that moment. And, we've talked before, I've been a clinical dietitian and seen lots of people when suffering in situations where they don't have the opportunities to walk on a bodybuilding stage, and there are a lot of things that they don't have control of. They just have to keep enduring. So I always have that perspective to be really grateful when I am competing, to realize that my frustrations, big picture, are probably pretty simplistic if it's getting on stage and flexing muscles. So with that perspective, I'm always super pumped and happy at the Olympia. I'll be smiling out there even if I'm in the last call out. So that was the placings. We're going to dive a little bit more into what happened and why I let up. But at that level, just being slightly off in conditioning or just a little less flat can be the difference from some guys really pushing forward, especially if a lot of guys that are on, have some new guys coming into the mix now too. So it was a cool dynamic to see. But post show, it keeps me super hungry. I am not one that gets beat down by lower placings or feeling like there's failure present. It just makes me super hungry to progress and keep improving in bodybuilding. That's why I love bodybuilding, is the day-to-day lifestyle, the training, and just trying to improve myself, not just on stage, but just overall personal development too.
Yeah, I love that perspective, John. At the end of the day, bodybuilding, we all love it. We're passionate about it, but it really is a first world privilege, right? We have the opportunity to starve ourselves in this abundant food environment. Dr. G, I want to turn it over to you. From my knowledge, I think you competed in one show this season. Is that correct, or were there more?
Well, I actually did a smaller show a little bit earlier, just about 4 weeks out. to test the waters out a little bit. But really, the focus was on the USA Championship.
And tell us about how that went.
Well, the USA Championship, it didn't go as well as expected. I was definitely disappointed. The place I got 7th place in the lightweight class, and I haven't been a lightweight in over 20 years. I've actually been very competitive as a middleweight and or welterweight. But I had a little injury at the end of 2018 in my lower back SI joint area, which actually it got pretty bad. I got some really bad radiculopathy, and it went down my leg, and I lost quite a bit of muscle mass on my right leg. I have some numbness and tingling. So a lot of the part in early 19 was kind of getting that quad back and getting some strength back. So in that process, I did lose a little bit of mass, and I thought, you know what, let me see what I can do if I can dip down to the lightweight class. I knew I was going to have to suck down quite a bit to make that, because it's definitely way below, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. But like John, I have a good outlook on it. You know, I've had a lot of success, and I've had a lot of, if you want to call them failures, where, you know, I haven't won. The outcome hasn't been as what I've wanted. But like John, I always like to push forward and keep improving. And I'm one that takes responsibility for, you know, my actions or how I present. I don't like to blame politics or judges or this or that. No, you know what? I deserve what I got. And when you see the pictures and you look at the comparisons, I deserve to get 7th place at this show. And what I like to do is just take an objective point of view, which I think John does. This is what I admire about John, is you look at yourself and say, okay, well, let's go to the drawing board, and what can I fix? What do I need to do? And one thing I appreciate that John said is, definitely as you go up in these levels, you know, from a regional show to a national show to the pro level, pro show to the Olympia, you know, these percentages just get smaller and smaller. And, you know, the little things that matter, they matter more and more as you go up and you go up the escalons in competition. So at the Olympia level, when you're going with the best in the world, I mean, the difference between 1st and 13th is minuscule. So you have to really appreciate those nuances as we're going to talk about in preparation for our shows.
Excellent. As you mentioned, Dr. G, our next goal here is to really get into those nuances of your contest prep. And I think the overview both of you laid out is fascinating, because I saw the pictures from both of your shows. You both looked phenomenal, yet both you were like, yeah, I was disappointed, like these things were off. And for that reason, it's really interesting to get into the details here. So let's start with how long the duration of your contest prep was. And when we look at the overview of how long it was, let's talk about what weight you started at, what weight you got down to, and if you took your off-season high body weight and dieted it all off in one shot, or maybe if you took some sort of mini cut or diet before the diet at some point in your off-season to set yourself up to be in a better position for contest prep. John, start us off here.
Yeah, and before, just something you had mentioned about like looking at pics, I have to say, like, off these Olympia pictures and what's being on stage next to these guys is truly, you cannot judge these things off pictures. It just does not even capture it. I know you know this too, Mike. And I would have like a picture from a professional photographer versus like people screenshotting the videos, and it's a completely different look. Like, so what the judges see that close up in a lineup, that's the only people that can truly be able to judge this stuff accurately. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you can look pretty awesome up there either way, right? To the off pictures. So, but yeah. Anyway,
John, real quick, I want to say a little funny comment. What's funny is sometimes I see people put like your absolute worst picture when you're relaxed next to somebody else's absolute best picture, and then they say, you know, how did they place ahead of you or behind you, whatever the case. I think that's really funny when people do that, because you have to judge it live. That's the only way you can really see it.
Yeah, those even posting all the mandatory poses, it's like you miss the transitions and the movements and all
Yes.
you judge and all that stuff. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
John, I think that's an excellent point, especially when it comes to the pictures. I mean, if we consider something just from lighting from show to show, and you'll see like the general perception from the comment section is like, oh, everyone was just off at the show, and it's like, really, were they all off, or is it just that the lighting in these
Yeah.
pictures doesn't exactly represent how everyone looked?
Yeah, I think was USA's. I think the lighting was terrible. Like everyone looked flat. And I'm just looking at these people like they're flat, they're flat, and I'm like, wait a second. I think it's the lighting. I think it's just that they weren't flat. It was just how they set up and camera or whatever it may be. So
Well, John, I actually was flat, so I could.
you were real flat then. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. For my contest prep duration, I started 16 weeks out, which I would say on average would be around normal. I've done preps in like 14 weeks, but typically I've done 20 weeks. Leading up into that prep, I was just kind of more in a holding phase. So body weight was just still maintaining around this kind of high 230s, 238, 239. I think I touched 240 in the off season. That's about as high as I'll let my body weight go, and I'm pretty comfortable around that too. So I do have to keep in mind throughout my offseason that there is a weight cap restriction, and there's no way I can move up to this next weight class. I mean, I could, but it's not like when I'm an amateur and there's like a 225 and there's all these other brackets. Going into the open is just not something that I want to do. So I am limited within that, and so I'm limited with how high I want to bring my body weight up because I'm just realistic about not having to want a diet for greater than 20 weeks. So at that high 230 mark, it's a good spot where I have good conditioning. I have about 25 pounds to come down to stage weight, which over a 16 to 20 week contest prep is a good rate of loss. And it can give me some flexibility if there's setbacks or I, wanted to do some type of diet break or use some type of caloric like intermittent dieting where I have high days and low days and I can account for those things. So yeah, 16 weeks out, I have it marked down. I was 237.6. So, and then I ended up getting all the way down. My low was 210, and that was actually the morning of weigh-ins. And that was my lowest I hit. I think prior to that, I hit like a 210.8 or so. And so that was 27 pounds over those 16 weeks. And did that all in just one shot. So there wasn't any type of diet break or any type of holding phase throughout that. It was a continuous diet.
John, did you run into any issues with all of the scheduling controversies surrounding the Olympia? Did that impact how you structured your diet?
So I did initially start dieting 20 weeks out from the original Olympia date, which was supposed to be, of course, like September 14th. And we pretty quickly found out, I think I was about 4 weeks in, that, hey, we're going to move the Olympia back, or we might not even have it. So 4 weeks in, it was basically like a mini cutting phase. It wasn't anything too aggressive. It's kind of like that early, some easy fat loss happening. So I hadn't gotten too far. I just ended up transitioning to more of like I said, like a holding phase, or a very, very slight surplus to hold until I was actually going to be starting contest prep. So for me, it wasn't that impactful just because I would have already been qualified for the Olympia. So it gave me that really good flexibility, unlike some of the other competitors that, have been like they qualified in, May for the Olympia, like maybe at the Indy Pro. And then they're like, all right, cool. I just have like 8 more weeks, whatever, to Olympia. It's like, oh no, you have like 20 more weeks. And so there was guys at Olympia that have been dieting since January. So I was definitely fortunate. It didn't really impact me as far as what I was doing with my prep.
Dr. G, you mentioned how you competed in a lighter weight class than usual. So I'm particularly interested to get into the weeds here for you. How long was your prep? What weight did you start at? And what weight did you finish at?
Yeah, my prep for this show was 16 weeks as well, which it really should have been longer. I started at about 194 and I weighed in at exactly 154.25. So I was at the very top of the, as heavy as I could be for the lightweight division. And it was rigorous to get there, and I'll get into the details later. But 1 week out from the show, I weighed 167, 168. So I had to really suck down to make that, and most of that weight loss, it took some. We'll talk about that in the peak week component, and what I did to do that, and what I won't do again, because I've never done that before, to lose that kind of extreme weight to get to a weight class before. But my prep, the USA was originally scheduled for July, and I started prepping for that actually about 20 weeks out. So I was about 204 pounds, and then I actually dropped down to about maybe 188. But then they moved the show, and then they didn't really have a set date till later. Then it was in December. So I actually did like a mini cut early in the year, and then I stayed in the mid 190, basically between 188, 193, about 5-pound window or so. And then 16 weeks out, then I actually started the cut for the show. And I didn't really make a decision to go into the lightweight class until maybe about 4 weeks in, as I was kind of looking at my body and seeing that I had a little more body fat than usual. And I was thinking, I think I'm going to really need to, I want to get the conditioning there. And to be honest, I probably still had, even though I got to the weight, I probably still had another 5-6 pounds of body fat that I could have lost. So my conditioning was good, but not great.
Very interesting. I was going to ask you that, considering the magnitude of weight loss from the onset, if your goal was to get into that weight class or not.
Yeah, it was, I can always, a lot of people use, I still use, of course, skin folds and the other measures, usually because I have access to my lab. I get in a DEXA. I'll have one of my colleagues do a DEXA scan, and we do those periodically. We'll do an ultrasound, but even the skin folds I kind of keep, but I use that just kind of as landmarks. They're not my one measurement. So, I always look at the mirror and see what it looks like. To me, honestly, like the best measure for what my conditioning is I actually look at what my glutes look like, and then if I still have, like for this show on my right lower glute, I had the beginnings of the striations, but my upper glutes were not striated. My left glute, for whatever reason, holds a little bit more fat, so it actually did not have quite as much there. So I kind of know my body, and same thing with my abdominal region. I know when my skin is there, and typically when I do skin folds, if I'm on, my skin folds are typically, 6, 7 total in 3 measurements. So it might be like 2 on the abdominal, 1 or 2 on the quad, and then 1 or 2 on the pec, and then that's usually the total. But I was at about 10 this time around, so it made I kind of know all those things just by looking at myself and then the other objective measurements.
Excellent. Definitely some signs of being a seasoned competitor and knowing how things should be operating. Let's dive into the details of the diet, gentlemen. So, John, I believe you mentioned that you just did this all straight in one shot. There were no diet breaks per se, but what about diet refeeds? When we look at the structure of your diet on a microcycle level, how often were you using low calorie days compared to high calorie days? And then I am curious, what was the lowest calorie / macronutrient content of your diet in prep?
Yeah, for the most part, it was a pretty just across the board, like a continuous energy restriction. So at the start of prep, I was around 3,200 calories on my training days. So there was a training day difference and an off day difference that I would do, but averaged out, it was I think around 2,700 calories or so, if I had to look back. But that was like 350 grams of carbs, about 300 protein, 40 fat. Then on the off day, it would come down to 100 grams of carbs, 300 protein, and 75 fat. And so I would do like a rotation schedule. And from an adherence standpoint, like on my off days, I am pretty sedentary versus my training days. So I know we have like the discrepancy between like, there's some research and resistance training, like 90 minutes of full body workouts, 10 sets of failure or whatever, and you maybe burn like 400 calories. So it's not like this huge 1,000 calorie difference, but I just know off my step count along with my resistance training and the duration of that training is quite different than what be depicted in some of this stuff. So I can get away using a lot lower energy restriction on my off days. So that was the initial setup, and it was pretty continuous. So I would just monitor and go along the way. And in those early stages of contest prep, you're going to stay pretty full. It's I know you could set it up with running a larger deficit daily, and then account for that on like maybe once a week, have a high day, and I've done structures like that. I tend to just have poor digestion on those high days, and then I feel like I'm having to towards the end of the week reducing calories further. I'm having just for one, the perception of prep being harder is higher, and if that's just a perception, and then it affects my training, but I do feel like training starts having more detriments. So I rather just diet on more food and not have high days, or use them as I need, because I think there's still benefit to them. I was initially in prep still having like a meal that I'd go out and have a few sushi rolls. So I would do some sushi, it's fish and rice. It's kind of similar to what I'm already eating, and that would have to be accounted for as well. And starting off, I think this is one of the mistakes. I should have just pulled those off to keep my fat loss rate faster in the beginning, because I would stay full, and it wasn't really an issue of like training performance that I needed to have this boost of carbohydrate. Um, and so I don't think there was any benefit really to it beyond like the psychological benefit of going out with my wife and having this meal. So one thing that I would do different, but for the most part, yeah, it was just pretty much a continuous shot. I would have some times where I would notice some being pretty flat, and bring in like a little bit more of a higher day, more so to test of like what I would be wanting to do on peak week. Um, I think one day over the course of like my 7 to 10 days dieting wasn't taking me that far out of the deficit. I did, as I got leaner, have a course where I did 2 high days in back to back, going along with some of like the research from Bill Campbell's lab. And what I did on my last contest prep is I dieted like that. I did 5 low days and 2 high days, and it worked really well. At least the ease of prep felt much more than what I've done previously. And I had those 2 high days, and I just saw not really any type of subjective or even benefit, even objectively from it. Outside of it, just took me away from dieting. Um, and at that point in prep, it was kind of reaching a point where I was kind of stalled, and so let me do these 2 high days, and I just had to catch back up after those 2 high days, then finally get back down to dropping in. So I don't think I was truly stalled. I think I just needed to keep dieting or just push harder, because going through and measuring fatigue, like how is my energy, how is my sleep, how is my training performance, like all those markers were still pretty good. So it's like, do you want to test maybe pulling back some? And it's like, okay, that did work. Well, let me just push now. And that kind of verifies it, versus like always just pushing and digging yourself down. So it was a test. But after that point, I felt behind. And so I never did another high day. It was a continuous push down after about the 5 week mark on prep, all the way to stage. And so the low I got down to was about 1,900 calories. It was 150 grams of carbs, 300 protein, and 25 grams of fat. And those fats are mainly just from trace sources. So that is counting all fats in the diet with a little addition, but not much at 25 grams.
John, you mentioned there that in the past you went with this kind of 5 low, 2 high approach, and then for this prep, for most of it, you just had higher days for training and then lower days on your off days. How was your training split set up so the listeners can get a little bit better idea of how many high and low days you were having per week?
Yeah, so there was about 5 high days per week and 2 low days. So I was doing a push pull off legs off split, and that did change towards the end of prep once I felt like I would, because my weaker parts are usually chest and shoulders, and those will be the parts that start fading training wise as well, like performance. So those sessions were getting pretty long. So I just pulled off the accessory work pretty much from all days and moved it to an off day. So eventually I was training 4 days on, 1 day off. It would be push pull. Then I had like a day of delts, abs, calves, and arms, and so it would be like 8 movements that I had on all these other days. They're all isolation. They're not very taxing, but it shortened all my sessions up from like a little over that hour mark to I could do some in like 45 minutes to an hour. So the level of fatigue management that I could get out of that was really huge, and I could maintain that quality session training instead before I got into like just poor quality volume. And I think that was more benefit than just trying to just reduce sets on the one day, and rather than just spread the volume out over more days.
Absolutely. Great insight there, John. Dr. G, did you get yourself any refeeds or diet breaks during prep? And perhaps more intriguingly, how low did calories have to get the stage weight?
Yeah, I didn't implement any until really till the end, and they were kind of far and few in between. Just because I didn't really have room to do it. I mean, I only had 16 weeks, so I was really kind of playing catch up. So I started the diet on roughly about 2,900 calories. And then I slowly lowered it. And typically what I do is I don't do a whole lot of cardio in my off season. I keep it very minimal. So I usually do about 20 minutes, low intensity, like 3 days a week. And one thing that I really focused this time around was my non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So, now that my job years ago used to be, I used to own a gym, own a PT clinic. So I was always on my feet moving around. But now my job sits behind a desk, or and now it's even worse because I don't even have to go on campus. I go to my computer and I lecture from my computer. So, I walk from my bedroom to my office, and that's pretty much the extent of my walking. So I try to do some little things like, and I measure the step count quite a bit. So my wife and I have 2 little dogs. So, we take them out in the morning, take them out in the afternoon. And then that's, really easy to recover from that. It's just basically non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Same thing on the weekend. I try to do a few more things around the house. So I try to become a little more handy instead of paying a gardener or paying. So I was pulling weeds. I was doing building things. I was just kind of doing more things in the backyard and just trying to do more step counts. And actually that kind of helped. My wife appreciated it because I was productive in doing chores and saved us a little money on that end. And then for me, I was like, well, it's cool. I'm actually burning some extra calories and I'm doing things that are relatively not that difficult to recover from, but I'm just burning the calories. So that really helps. So I think in the beginning, I had the energy to do that. And that's why I was actually able to come down successfully, right around 2,800 calories. My split typically, I keep my protein typically fairly high, 250 to 300, typically at 250 for most days. And then my carb intake would typically be at about 300, and then the remaining would be from the fats. And then, of course, I lower that depending on how my progress is. So, I was looking to lose. Initially, I was looking about 2 pounds a week is what I wanted to shoot for. I gradually brought up my cardiovascular activity up a little bit more. And then obviously, when I decided to go into the lightweight class, then I had to really make the push a little bit harder. And I realized, okay, well, let's keep be a little more aggressive. So my low days toward the end got down to about maybe 1,700 calories, and those were pretty consistent. That's when I had to implement some of the smaller refeeds, but a refeed was not like I was going to go up to 3,000 calories. a refeed might be, instead of 1,700, I'm going to consume maybe 2,000 calories or 2,100 calories. And typically that would come in the form of carbohydrates. And typically I would time those on my leg training sessions, where I know I'm going to typically, expend more calories rather than, let's say like an arm session. Training split wise, pre-contest, I always do a 6-day split. So I train I do a lot of volume over that time, but I spread it out over the week. And I do typically on Mondays and Fridays are my leg days. I have one quad focus day, one hamstring glute focus day, and actually some adductors in that day as well. I always hit all the muscle groups, but I'll focus on posterior chain or anterior chain on those. And then I usually do a push day with an emphasis on shoulders and triceps and light chest. And then on my second push day, a few days later, I'll focus on chest and I'll do lighter shoulders and lighter triceps. Then I have a pull day. So I'm gonna just kind of go from the top. Monday is legs, quad focus. Tuesday is push, focus on triceps or shoulders and triceps, light chest. Wednesday is a pull day, and I'll incorporate some light biceps on that day. Thursday is another push day, but now I focus on chest, light shoulders, light triceps. Friday is another leg day, focusing on posterior chain. And then usually on Saturday, it's kind of like a lighter, high volume day. I start with biceps and triceps, and then I'll do some ab work, and then I'll hit some, maybe some my delts are something that I really want to focus on, and my lats. So I'll hit a few auxiliary movements there, but not high intensity at all. It's more just getting a little volume in there with very moderate intensity.
Excellent. I think most of our listeners will be aware of the benefits of incorporating a high protein diet, particularly during an energy deficit. But I would say that your protein intake might even be a little bit higher than most would expect for your body weight, Dr. G. Could you kind of elaborate on the benefits there and what you personally experience from incorporating this approach?
Yeah, I definitely, I've always kept my protein high. It lets me feel full, so it gives me that satiety for sure. And really, even when you read a lot of the literature, even consuming excess protein for the most part is going to typically not be detrimental to you. So even though it's not going to enhance, necessarily, I'm not expecting to grow more muscle, especially on a caloric deficit at that point in time. But I think it's going to kind of give me an insurance policy to preserve some of that. I think on my lower days, I went down to maybe about 200 grams of protein. But even then, I was probably weighing 175, 170 pounds. So it's still a relatively higher intake, I would say, than maybe most people would do.
Do you have a general recommendation you like to go by?
Well, I think the absolute minimum is 1 gram per pound, so 2.2 grams per kilogram. I think that's kind of like my starting point, where a lot of people say like that's like my upper goal. I think no, like that's kind of my starting point. And then definitely when you're dieting, that's just for bodybuilding, of course. I wouldn't say this for my other athletes, but for bodybuilding. And then I would definitely go up to maybe as high as 3.3 grams per kilogram. Yeah.
Awesome.
I think we probably read a lot of this research from a minimalist point of view of we're looking at certain studies that just maybe they're just looking at markers for protein synthesis, and you're like, okay, well, 1 gram pound of body weight, that maxes out protein synthesis, so that's what you need. Anything beyond that is just a waste. And it's like, well, that's only one marker that we're looking at. There's lots of other markers, and you're within like a whole physiological system of how someone feels and adherence. And so there's so much more to it than just looking at just, hey, protein synthesis or a particular type of pathway in the body. So like within a contest prep setting, there's good application for using, I think, higher protein intakes. And like Dr. G said, do you want to just do the minimum? Like, what if you leave something on the table, and if there's no detriment to going higher, and you're not taking away from your other macronutrients,
Right.
then I don't see a harm for it. Now, the later stages of contest prep, I think that's where you can have some applications and probably shifting that protein intake down, like you did, Dr. G, right? Like if
Hmm.
your carbohydrate is getting so low, that's impacting training performance, and your protein is that high. Well, your protein's becoming very expensive, inefficient glucose. So it's like, well, why don't we
Yes.
lower protein and shift that into carbohydrate? And at that point, it makes better training is going to make better muscle retention rather than that high protein intake. So I think that is a good way to manage your macronutrients across a contest prep based around your training performance, but also considering your hunger as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree 100% with that. And definitely you have to, I always kept that in my mind, like if my carb intake is so low that I can't train, it's really going to be awful. And I really, even on my low days, my carb intake, on my lower calorie days when I was, at 1700 calories or so, I was still consuming, 150 grams of carbs or so. To adjust for that, like John said, well, if I'm gonna consume 150 of carbs, I can't consume 300 of protein because now I'm gonna be closing up, getting really close to where I need to be. So I dropped the protein a little bit, and then my fats were traced at that point in time to be able to
Yeah.
kind of get to that goal calorie intake. And one other thing that I wanted to mention, I think when we look at a lot of the studies too. Often they're done on unenhanced individuals, and there's a hypothesis that I have, and I don't think this has been investigated yet, but I think when you're training with much higher volume, most training studies are only done, the people are training 3 days a week, 4 days a week max. They're not training to the same intensity and volume often that we would do it. And secondly, they don't have the experience that we have. They may be an experienced weightlifter, maybe only has a year of training under the belt, maybe two, not 5, 10, 15, 20. And then on top of that, what if you're an enhanced bodybuilder? I think, if you're taking, some other supplements that are going to potentially upregulate your ability to increase muscle protein synthesis, I hypothesize that if you're an enhanced lifter, you actually may be able to process and utilize that protein. I don't know if I'm wrong or not, but I definitely think it's a hypothesis that hasn't been tested.
Yeah, it's great because I also think I've debated on this as well too, because then you might think of the other side of the equation, right? Well, maybe if you're enhanced, you'd have also decreased protein degradation. But if you're probably training beyond what you could, being that you are enhanced. So I mean, there's probably is this mean where you probably could utilize higher protein intakes, right? I think something else you brought up in your prep that I didn't touch on, but I think was a huge one that I've done over the years was really focusing on steps and NEAT. And my first preps were pretty brutal because I didn't even know about, like, NEAT was there, but I read about NEAT in like my undergrad program, but I didn't think to like, oh yeah, maybe my NEAT's decreasing, like I'm just moving around less, and to think to trap steps. It was like, no, I just do cardio and I'll just do more cardio. And I didn't think about the cardio modality either. And like, it was always the Stairmaster. Like that is what you do. And at least what I did. And it was just brutal, the amount of fatigue that I would generate from it. And that's what I think made my preps just the perception of it being very, very challenging. And it's like, oh, you gotta suffer, bro, and you should feel like your soul's left your body on prep. It's like, and now I never feel like that. And someone's like, oh, you probably just got used to it. And like, no, I really think my preps have gotten easier. And so they have gotten easier, but by far they're become more efficient. And I think you should associate like finding easier ways to prep doesn't mean that you're like trying to cop out on hard work. It's mean you're trying to be more efficient in your process and improve body composition. I think NEAT and step counts is such a beneficial tool, because I'm like you, Dr. G. I sit at the computer most of the day, and my step count is about 2,500 steps if I'm really just going to work all day. I don't go to the gym, which is nothing. And so I usually start with a baseline of cardio in the off season always. I might bring that up, but I never go above like 40 minutes anymore of direct cardio work. That's moderate intensity. And then from there, at that point on, it's all pushing steps up. I have a treadmill now at home that I can walk on. I do it's low intensity still. So I just count that as my steps. If for some reason I can't get outside, but towards the end of prep, I get up to like 15,000 steps. So coming from 2,500 to 15,000 steps is a large rise, and that's a huge driver to keep me progressing as well.
Yep, absolutely.
What about you, Dr. G? Did you track your steps on prep, and then how high did they get?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think like John, when I was, I track them regularly. I check them every day. So even when I'm off season. So if I'm on a sedentary day, I'm like John, maybe a little bit more, maybe 3,000, 4,000 steps. So I brought that up to. I kind of just go gradually, right? I try to bring it up, and I monitor. I wear it when I'm doing my aerobic stuff as well. So I mean, it's all inclusive at the end of the day. So when I see, I started around maybe 6,500, and then I brought that up to 7,000, 8,000, and then it was gradual. But toward the end of prep, the last few weeks, I was averaging about 14,000 steps a day.
When it comes to scientists, I think it's really interesting hearing how they apply their work or their practice. Dr. G, last time we had you on, we talked about refeeds, we talked about fasted cardio, and this thought comes to mind. I heard Grant Tinsley mention in a recent podcast that he was presenting at a conference, and it was lunch. He got some Subway, and he was sitting down eating a foot long, and someone came over and were like, "Why are you eating lunch? You're the intermittent fasting guy. Shouldn't you not be eating?" And it was like, I study this, so that doesn't mean I have to practice it. So maybe some of our listeners who are familiar with the podcast and be like, "Oh, Dr. G's on. I listened to that episode. He's probably going to tell us about how he utilized protein enhanced cardio. It was his most successful prep ever. He incorporated refeeds based on all of his research." But it's a little more context dependent than that, huh?
Yeah, definitely. You have to take the big picture approach. And like John was talking about, I mean, there is some scientific validity to the refeeds, but at the end of the day, it's like, in what context are you applying it? At the end of the day, if you're behind and you see that you're not getting there, you don't have the luxury to be able to do some of those things. And the refeed context in the that Dr. Campbell did in his lab, it was a 5-day diet, 2-day refeed. Well, you may not have the luxury to have 2 days back to back. So you have to kind of apply it as you can and see what may work. In a perfect world, if you want to do a 32-week diet, then yeah, you can do a 2-week diet or 3-week diet with a 1-week diet break. But I don't know many people that want to diet for 32 weeks to be able to get into shape.
Yeah, I talked about making your preps easier, which refeeds can give you a perception of that, but also it might make them less efficient too. So you have to put that into consideration. Yeah, have a timeline to hit still.
And one thing that I like to mention too is for me, I'm like a light switch trigger eater. So for me, if I'm very focused, like I'm very disciplined, and if I know that I'm going to need to hit this many calories and my macros, I can do that. But the minute I go into like a refeed switch and I turn that up, sometimes it's hard for me to not go over my limit, because it's like a trigger. It's like it triggers I get more food, and then it's hard for me to focus on not doing that. So that's why it's very independent on the individual, because if it triggers them to eat more and they can't get back on track, or they overeat, that's not going to be a positive experience for them.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent consideration. Based on the current evidence, I would say that refeeds are probably their most beneficial effect probably has to do with adherence rather than anything physiological per se at the moment. And, it's not automatic that having refeeds will make your prep easier or will make you better able to adhere to your diet. As you mentioned, Dr. G, that might not be the case with certain individuals. Let's dive into peak week here, guys. John, tell us about your week of nutrition leading up to the contest and how perhaps previous preps influenced your decision making here.
Yeah, so I've done quite a few different type of peaks. I think this was my 13th show, and I've always tried to really like my first shows. I prepped myself. Layton Norton put out a peak week series on bodybuilding.com, and I don't know, probably a lot of us read that. So I had some type of science grounded approach. So I've never done anything too extreme. But coming from 2019, I had such a successful peaking, and that was probably my best peak that I've ever done. First off, that I was extremely conditioned. I was ready. And that made it just pretty lackluster as far as like manipulating variables. Like for I won't go too far into the other ones, but what influenced this one was like the Tampa Pro. I basically just was cruising into that show on maintenance calories and having 3 gallons of water every day and having normal sodium intake, which was at the time like a quarter teaspoon of salt to all my meals. So it was very consistent. I was waking up that week of the show just looking phenomenal. And I have 2 meals and have that right balance of fullness. And I was so lean that I wasn't retaining any water anyway. So that's exactly what I did for Tampa Pro. I did nothing different. I walked out there just like my normal day, and I nailed it. And same for the last year's Olympia too. I reduced water just slightly on the day of the show, but food and everything remained the constant variable, and it was a great showing. So that was some of the takeaways, because in previous preps I had used diuretics, because it's just like the questioning of like, well, can I get that 1% better? And I need to be dry, and then you have everyone this influencing you of like, this is what we do. And so that had been in place before, and I've always never nailed it. I would always come in flat using stuff like that. And so that 2019 was the first time that I never did, and I did less manipulations, and I looked even better. And which you have some good confidence going into your show, knowing like, this is how I look, and I look great. And it's okay that I'm not going to have the extra 1%, because it could also be 10% worse. So going for 2020 Olympia, my body weight was at a pretty good spot for about 5 days out. I was right under 212, right when I woke up in the morning. So I didn't have to worry about having to do drastic manipulations to get down in weight. So, because that's a whole nother thing. I'm usually right at weight when I'm pretty conditioned. Now, body fat wise, I wasn't as lean as I was in 2019. And I knew that going in. And so that's why I was kind of frustrated like a few weeks out, because, oh, man, I know I'm behind, and I had to start really pushing hard to get there. So I didn't have the opportunity either to feed back up or bring my calories to maintenance into the show. So it was a little bit different situation. I was dieting all the way up to that peak week, not as lean, but that also wasn't going to be any reason where I'm going to do an extreme manipulation because I still have body fat, because that's not just, if you get flat from manipulating water, then you're going to be flat and fat on stage. That's even worse. So anyway, yeah, the first week I was right around 212, 2.5 gallons of water per day. I was still salting my meals like normal. Carbohydrates were about 125 grams. Protein was still around 300, and fats were still pretty much just trace. And I kept steps up that whole time, because that was pretty much by that point bringing me down a little bit, but almost maintaining my body weight. And then that stayed consistent all the way to my weigh-in, because I was at weight, so it just made sense to not try to taper back on my steps or reduce food or increase food, because I might not make weight or have to wake up show day and actually do something more extreme. The day prior to weigh-ins, I did taper back steps slightly, and I think I dropped off some fatigue, and I woke up looking harder, and that was when I woke up at 210. So waking up at 210, I had just some fluids, and when weigh in, I ended up weighing in right at 212 on the dot with like my sweats on. So I was not up that much. So one day out, I was going to keep fluid consistent, sodium consistent, and just bring carbohydrates up to what I've known from what I was practicing throughout prep with a few refeeds that I've done. And in my previous experiences, I don't need much to get full. And I already look pretty full even when I'm a little flat. So I did 250 grams of carbs, and I brought protein down to 250 grams and still did trace fats. And that gave me had a good full look. And morning of the show, I woke up at 212, so it was a good composition. I had, a good amount of dryness and everything. Pretty much wanted to try to maintain that look to stage, which we were going on stage. Basically had time for about one meal, and then stage time. And so I had 60 grams of carbohydrates prior to stage. I think I had another two like rice cakes just as a quick snack about an hour before. Fluids is what I did manipulate though a little bit. I did like 8 ounces of fluid with my first meal, another 10 ounces from then to that snack, and then no fluids from there. And I did have a good amount of sodium with those rice cakes prior to pumping up. Now, the look I brought. So looking back, I did get a little flatter when I from that first waking up to stage time, and I think it's because I just reduced fluid too much. I should have just kept my fluids up higher, maybe double what I had done, because the duration got a little bit spread out more than I anticipated, and it's hard to like assess yourself as much when you're backstage, and so you're like, all right, I look good, and you're like, oh shit, I should have had more fluids, um, but that's overall how that peak went. And I brought fluids up for finals, and I stayed with a pretty consistent carbohydrate amount that I was doing the day prior. So it was about 40 grams of carbs per meal, and they only the top 10 went out to finals, and we found that out when we were already backstage. So then I was like, "See y'all, I'm going to eat sushi and ice cream." That was a real throw off, because we went backstage and we were supposed to go on first. So, okay, great. Then we find out we're going to go on last. So now you're like, oh man, some guys don't have food. They didn't plan for that. You're looking at going on stage at 6:30 versus I think they end up going on at like 11 p.m. And then we find out, well, only the top 10 were going out. So some last minute changes, nothing against like the show promoter or IFBB. They did a phenomenal job just making Orlando happen in like 5 weeks time. And honestly, it was a great show out there. I kind of hope they just keep doing it out there anyway. But that's my peak week. So nothing too dramatic. But like I said, I think getting really, really lean and then keeping your variables consistent, and having a predictable result for stage is the best thing you can do, especially for someone that's early on a beginner. I'm doing it at the advanced level. So it's even being a beginner, I would say even more so. Like play with one variable at a time, which I think carbohydrates has the biggest impact on your physique look. So just know how that impacts your effect from a refeed day to an off day, and then maybe time that into your peak week and leave the other variables the same, so you actually know what worked or what didn't.
Yeah, excellent advice, John. Dr. G, let's hear about your unique predicament.
Well, yeah, I'm actually going to go on a quick tangent here, because John and I started talking about we started writing a paper on peak week recommendations for bodybuilding. Unfortunately, John had a lot of other projects on his plate, so he was not able to continue. But we actually just submitted the paper for publication. Actually, just about a week or two ago, and I actually co-authored it with. So I was the lead author. Scott Stevenson is the second author. Chris Barakat is the third author. Alan Aragon is the fourth author, and Brad Schoenfeld is the fifth author. So we have a pretty great lineup of not just people that are in the field as researchers, but also that are both researchers and also practitioners and bodybuilders themselves. So we have a lot of good recommendations, and we kind of took it down. John probably knows a little bit of the outline because he was on some of the initial emails, but we discussed carbohydrates, we discussed water and sodium, we discussed everything else, with regards to training, cardio, et cetera. So we really kind of put everything together. And one of the things that we started the paper with and ended the paper with is none of this matters at all, which John already said, if you're not in shape, right? So it miraculously, of course, if you're already, before you're getting ready to compete, you're gonna, no matter what you do, you're gonna look great because you're ready. You're not trying to make up for some of that. And unfortunately, a lot of people try to use this last peak week as a miraculous, I'm gonna now lose this extra. No, it doesn't matter if you have an extra 5, 6, 10 pounds of body fat, you have that there. And actually, this last USA is a great example for me, where for me, like John, for this Olympia, he felt he was a bit off. My best showing for me, arguably, is the 2013 LA Championships, which was a week before the USA's, where I actually beat some amazing competitors. I came to second in the overall to Breon Ansley, and then I actually beat Danny Hester in a very heavy, very competitive middleweight class in that show. So there were some amazing competitors at that show, and that's probably the best that I've ever looked. But as to what John said, the reason I looked great is because a month out, I was ready to step on stage. By the time I got there, really, I don't think it mattered what I would have done. I was just ready. And that was not the case for this show. Since I'm a very goal-oriented person and I had committed to going into the lightweight class, I said I stayed committed to that goal. In retrospect, I think I probably would have been better off going into the welterweight class, not losing that much weight, because John it actually hurt my ego a little bit. John said it's because then you're fat and flat, and that was me, because I was fat and flat, and I was trying to make up so much room. I mean, I was so depleted to get down to that 154 that literally, I mean, I couldn't fill out, I couldn't eat enough, and I was trying to consume. I think I must consume 10,000 calories, maybe more on that night. Because I was consuming everything. I didn't even count it. I was just eating. I was eating and eating and eating because I just could not fill out. And not to mention, I have some GERD, gastroesophageal reflux, which gets flared up when I'm consuming that kind of quantity of food. On top of that, I've had weeks and weeks of consuming, sub 2,000 calorie days. So my digestion was not good. My GERD flared up. I get really bad hiccups where they can last literally for over 24 hours. Like I was just picturing myself hiccuping up on stage. Luckily, that wasn't the case. But I mean, I was miserable. And I remember going out at night, maybe 11 o'clock at night, to try to get a burger and fries down. And I could not finish a double-double. And I can slam down 2 4x4s of In-N-Out, no problem, any time of the day. But trying to eat 1 double-double and 1 order of fries was literally impossible. I felt sick. It was terrible. So it was not a pleasant experience. So I learned a lot from this show, because I actually literally broke almost all the rules that we wrote. Which was actually cool, because I'm my own experiment, and I actually don't mind doing some of that stuff. It's okay, I take a lot of notes. I literally have I think I've done over 40 shows, and I have a lot of notes into what works and what didn't work, and what I did. So this was definitely a first in losing that kind of weight. So back to the question, going on to peak week. So I had to weigh in on a Friday. So a Friday before, so 7 days out, I weighed 167.5 pounds. I had to weigh in at 154, right? So it was a lot of manipulation. So I did a very aggressive carb depletion, where I'm talking eating trace carbohydrates, whatever's in a few handful of vegetables. But even my vegetable content was a little bit lower, because the fiber, to me, in previous experiences, when I go that low on the carbohydrate, I'll typically eat a lot more of these fibrous vegetables, but it really irritates my stomach. So this time around, this was one rule that I did follow from what we wrote, is we actually kept the fiber content actually like under 20 grams. I was more about 15 grams or so with the fiber, and that actually helped tremendously. So my digestion was actually really good, but my calories were very low during that period of time. And it was basically protein, trace veggies, and no carbs, no grains, nothing else, just leading up to the show. And however, I did fat load on that as well. So we actually implemented some fat load to try to increase some of the intramicellular fat stores in there. So I was consuming not a whole lot of fat, but maybe about 60, 70 grams of fat during those days, along with protein and relatively low of the carbohydrate intake. And I did that basically on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I manipulated water basically by just increasing my water intake. I brought it up to about two. My normal water intake is only about a gallon. So I basically went up to about 2.5 gallons over the course of that time period. And by the time Wednesday rolled around, I had actually dropped down quite a bit of weight. I was down to about 61 pounds. My cardio was consistent. I was doing a lot of steps, and I was doing some depleting type workouts. So they were high volume, relatively low intensity. I didn't want a lot of soreness, but they were definitely glycogen depleting, kind of more metabolic training during those days. I did train legs early on in the week. And then that was on Wednesday. On Thursday, now this is when actually I'm trying to make sure that I do this right. Let's see, Wednesday, Thursday. No, actually, even on Thursday, my water intake was relatively high until about 12 hours, until about 24 hours before weigh-ins from my weigh-in time on Friday. So I was going to weigh in at about noon on Friday. So basically, I stopped water to just basically wash my food down at basically 12 p.m. on Thursday. The other things that I did is my sodium was relatively low. Basically, whatever was in the food, but basically trace sodium in there during that time period. And then I had to do some drastic stuff to get down, because now I had another 8 pounds to lose to be able to get there over that 24-hour period. So some of the things that I did, actually, Scott Stevenson has a technique where you actually sleep down with the head tilt down technique, which actually helps to. We wrote a whole thing on there, but it basically helps to enhance diuresis by sleeping in that head down head tilt technique by manipulating some of your blood pressure. Basically, when you go down in that position, your body kind of detects an increase in blood pressure, and naturally is going to try to increase your diuresis to be able to kind of help with that. So I slept. My wife almost killed me, but I slept this way for that night. That definitely helped. I actually had to do just an over-the-counter. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on it. A laxative, over-the-counter laxative, to be able to get some of that. And then I did have to do some diuretic to be able to get to that weight. And then when I woke up on Thursday, I woke up early Thursday morning, because we were planning on leaving at it's a 5-hour drive to Phoenix. So we were planning on leaving at about 6 a.m. So I woke up at 3. And what I did is I weighed myself then, and I was still maybe 158 or so. So I actually went into my bathtub, and I put the water on as hot as I could, and I laid there, and I did several rotations of that, and actually I dropped another 3 or 4 pounds that way. And then I put those sweatsuit ons. I slept the rest of the time with that. And I drove all the way to Phoenix with the sweatsuit on, and no heater or anything, but I just had the sweatsuit on, and I was layered up. My wife was driving, and then that laxative was still actually kind of taking effect. And literally, by the time I got to Phoenix, I went straight to the bathroom, got out of my suit, and then I weighed in, and I weighed in right on the dot at 154. Of course, I looked flat as a pancake. Immediately upon weighing in, I took some Pedialyte. I took a whole 32 ounces of that, and then it was basically now time to carb load and fluid load. And I just try to consume all of that. But it ended up being a disaster, because I couldn't fill out enough no matter what I ate. Even though I consumed, well over a gallon of fluids, I consumed plenty of sodium. I increased quite a bit of sodium. And then my stomach was uncomfortable. And when you see some of the pictures, I definitely lost some of the lines. And I also was my stomach was a little bit distended just from trying to get all that food down. It was a good experience, but one that I will not repeat again. And I have all the documentation for it, so it was a good learning experience.
That's insane. That sounds more similar to a combat sport athlete trying to make weight than a bodybuilder, but very, very interesting journey, Dr. G. We've hit our time here, fellas. Let me know. I totally understand if you have to get going. Do you want to wrap up with a summary of lessons learned and how you would change your approach next time?
Yeah, I can definitely do some, and kind of where I'm headed now too. So I had to plan out this next content. Such a planner, we all are probably as these so, and there's some uncertainty in those plannings because I don't know if they're going to put the Olympia back to December. They might leave it there as kind of like the end of the year kind of Super Bowl, like the truly the last show of the year versus having it in September. And that's kind of the word on the street. So you have to debate on, should I hit a show early and then have more time? If you hopefully you qualify, then you have time, or just have somewhat more of an off-season period and then hit a later show. However, the normal cutoff for the Olympia qualification is August 8th. That's Tampa. So it's either it would extend. I would either do like another 5 weeks of maintaining my weight and then a 12-week prep to the Indy Pro, or I would have to just do another 12 weeks of like maintenance and back right into prep. So I'm like, well, what's the best for me? And coming off like my needs from stage is not size. I don't need. I know I can't. I'm right at weight anyway. It was just nailing the peak and conditioning. So it makes sense for me to try to qualify early. So I'm going to just pretty much bring body weight up slightly over these next weeks, and then diet back down for about 12 weeks to my show, which should. I need redemption. I need to come on stage just like nasty, nasty shredded. And so things that I would do different from this past prep is it was really came down to timing. And I think that it's just such the hardest thing for people to gauge, and not pushing myself early on with a great enough deficit. And when fat loss could have just come easy, I could have pushed my step count up higher. I could have definitely eaten less food and then gotten ready ahead of time and been able to kind of coast into the show. And that's kind of your ideal, scenario there. And then also like a few cheat meals that were in, I would have definitely just left those out because I would have just stayed in the continuous deficit and then had more of like that kind of diet break approach. But that being the last 2 weeks of my show where I'm just coming up to more of a maintenance calories. You get that fresher look to your physique. You start getting fuller. You look harder just because you're fuller. You drop cortisol, and water's probably flushing at the same time. So that's kind of the prep experience that I want to get, and how 2019 was really successful for me. Peak-wise, I really wouldn't change much, except probably just going back to having a little bit more fluids on stage day. But this thing about just getting lean and just bring food up just slightly right before the day of the show works really well for me. So that's still the similar approach that I would take. So yeah, right now for me moving forward will be the Indy Pro, which will be in May, and then hopefully qualify and then compete at the Olympia again.
Love it, John.
Fantastic. Yeah. Dr. G, how about you? I know one thing that comes to mind is something I asked you about on Instagram, and that is if you would start your next prep at a lower body weight, and it seemed like you had some thoughts already about that.
Well, yeah, definitely. Well, I think the biggest thing is start off leaner. I'm definitely not a lightweight. Naturally, even welterweight for me is honestly has been hard to come down. So I think competitively. I took a few years off bodybuilding between 2016 through 18. So I took about a 2.5-year break where I was still lifting, but I just was not doing the full bodybuilding component. And I was just focusing on getting tenure and focusing on my career, doing other things. And then in 2018, that I stepped back on stage. But even that prep, I didn't give myself a whole lot of time. So now I think I don't think I'm going to do a show this upcoming year. If I do, it will probably be in November. but more than likely, I need a good year plus to be able to kind of grow back. I think competitively for me, I have a naturally thicker waistline and a shorter torso, which means that I have to have super huge delts and lats to be able to kind of compensate. So really, I need to kind of focus on growing and developing. So I think I need to really top out the middleweight class, and or maybe even a light heavyweight if I can get to that weight, or to push over that course of time. Definitely couldn't be a light heavyweight, I don't think. Well, although John went from a middleweight to a heavyweight in 1 year, so he gives me hope.
Let's hope for one.
Yeah, he gives me hope to be able to do that. But I'm gonna play it by ear for now. Right now, I'm just focusing on growing and just enhancing the physique. I took a little time off after the show, but for the next prep, for sure, I prefer 18 to 20 weeks of prep, because that gives me a little bit of buffer time, and then basically 3 to 4 weeks before the show, I'm ready to step on stage if I need to be. That gives me, again, in the event of any variables that come into play, I can practice some of the things some peak week strategies that we do. In regards to my best showing in 2013, arguably, a lot of the things that we actually wrote about, I did for that year in 2013. Basically, for me, I need to carb load early. And basically, so carb load usually Wednesday, Thursday. Friday is usually a lower carb day. And increase my fats, drop my water a little bit, but I still have some fluids in. Those are some of the things, the variables that we kind of discuss, and they work well for me, because that gave me that best approach when I have the notes and pictures and videos to kind of compare myself and see what I do. And then, of course, just not trying to go down to these weight classes that, you're just not going to look better. And especially making the mistakes, like at the end of the day, I needed another 5 or 6 pounds of body fat to drop. And it doesn't matter if I would have been a middleweight, a welterweight, or a lightweight, those 5 or 6 pounds would have been there. My condition was going to be lacking. And all I did was deplete myself to that. And actually, John hit it on the nose, to the point where, okay, well, now these smaller guys, I couldn't fill out in time, so they did look better than me. Even though I had the muscle mass to be able to compensate, the glycogen was just, I was not there. I did not have the muscle fullness that I needed, or the hardness, and I sacrificed a lot of that.
Do you have any ideas for your peak off-season body weight this time around? In your experience, is pushing into the 200 something that seems to benefit your physique favorably next time you step on stage?
Yeah, for me, I think if I can stay between say 195 to 200 and still see my abs in good condition, then that seems to be a good way to go. I mean, currently, even though I weighed in at 154, before my extreme measures to get down to 154, I was 167, let's say. So today I'm about between 185 and 188, and I've definitely put on some body fat, but actually not excessively like you would think. So I mean, you can still see my abs. I still have rounded delts, and you can see some definition. My legs are still separated. So those are all really good signs. I've put on probably a little bit of the visceral fat, but I'm kind of like where I'm comfortable. I feel good. I'm strong. I'm getting stronger, and I'm not overly fat. So I think if I can refine, right now, my goal is to kind of refine this 187 to 188 where I'm at, get a little harder at this, and then kind of build from there. And I think if I can get up to 195 to 200, with a similar conditioning that I'm at now or better, and then start my prep, I would be in a really good place. To give me 20 weeks from now to get into shape would be amazing.
Awesome. Unless anyone has anything to add, I think that covers it for today.
I don't have anything to add. Except that it's been a pleasure, guys. Dr. G, it's good to see you virtually face to face.
Yes.
It's always nice to come back on the podcast, Mike. And this was a conversation I was definitely excited about. Anything bodybuilding, I'm always excited about, and especially the way you run your podcast is very eloquent and always well articulated with your questions and thought out. So it's a pleasure as always to come back on. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. This is the new face-to-face, John. But I appreciate I appreciate the kind words. This has been an awesome discussion, guys. Real quick as we wrap it up, for our listeners who want to go and follow you and support you, John, where can we point them toward?
Yeah, primarily active on my Instagram, so that is at John Jewett 3. I am launching a university education platform that's coming in March. So that'll be J3 University, which will be pretty much your all-inclusive on how to bodybuild, how to just do physique sports for females as well. So from implementing a lot of the stuff that we talked about today, the science behind it, but also just in the trench anecdotal evidence too. So that will be coming soon. So those are where you can find me.
Super cool. Dr. G, some resources for yourself?
Yeah, for me, I think my Instagram is also where I'm most active, and it's at Dr. GFit, and that's all spelled out, Dr. GFit, and that's where I'm most active. I've been telling myself that I'm going to put an active YouTube channel, but I have about 3 videos on there, and that's about it. So I haven't committed myself to that. So I'm not going to hold myself accountable to that this year right now because I want to do it well. So I think I am doing more stuff on Instagram and do educational posts. And then obviously, look, I think if you want to follow the sciencey side on my ResearchGate, you can follow me. You can just go on ResearchGate and put in my name, Guillermo Escalante, and I upload my abstracts or any of the full open access articles on there that are available. And we have some good stuff coming out this year, so I'm really excited to do it in relation to physique sports, including some. I'm actually writing a couple of things right now on data that I collected over the last 2 years on bodybuilding. So it's going to be pretty fun to run through that data and present it here over the next year or so.
Very cool.
I have to say as well, Dr. G, for anyone that is listening, like some people get scared away from reading peer-reviewed literature, but a lot of your research reviews and papers you put out, they're so well written, and it's like those reviews are great condensed versions of each of these studies, and there's so many that are very bodybuilding applicable. You would gain so much value from go look up Dr. G and actually read some of these studies, and there'll be lots of takeaways that you gain from it.
Well, I really appreciate that. I know that's one thing I appreciate about John is, we actually, about all of us really, is that we all look at the nuances and we look at the science, and we're science based, but at the same time, we don't forget what's on the field and the anecdotes, because that's important too. And we're all practitioners. And I think really to be the best at what we do and helping people, I think it takes us to do that. And even with all of the background that we do, I mean, like I said, even self-experimenting, I know when I talk to Dr. Scott Stevenson, he does shows just to experiment on himself, to try different things. And he's got all these notes, which is great. I mean, I think what a great way to do it, and really self-experiment and really try some of these things out, because the only thing we're going to learn is by trial and error. And of course, understanding the individual differences, because everybody's going to respond differently. So I think it's really cool. And that's what I appreciate about, working with you guys, that you have that perspective.
For sure. That is the essence of the Muscle Memoirs podcast. But that does it for another episode, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good
Thank
one.
you. Bye-bye.